1, 2, 3, 4, now she's ready, now it's time. A Boston girl who knows true crime. She got cash, attitude, but a person in a dark blue. She knows Sunday, she knows summer, now she's ready, now it's time. A Boston girl who knows true crime. She got cash, attitude, but a person in a dark blue. She knows Sunday, she knows summer, Danny after dark.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, as you can see, I have a very special guest. You know him, you love him, Mr. Beckham. Welcome.
And good evening, Danny, and good evening to everybody out there in the chat. How y'all doing?
So I am thrilled to have Mr. Beckham here because we are doing a collaboration on this case. We have been discussing this case for quite a while, doing a collab for it to present to you guys. So it's finally time. But before we dive into who we are doing for tonight for the case, which if you saw the title, you already know, let's just go ahead and see who's here. So, hey, Kiss. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I love you and Cooper. So, hey, James Watson, Shelly, Doug Smith, Michael Daniel 69. Hello. Tony Stewart, Nick Norris. Good to see you. Let's see. Renee, Barb McLean, Capone, The Better Paul, Lesh. Hey, Lesh. Let's see. All right. Very special. I know. I mean, Beckham's sensitive, so I had to pump his ego to, get him on this channel. This case is very complex. It is also one of those cases that is quite graphic. So just fair warning to everybody. If this case, as we're presenting it, is a little bit much, totally understandable. You can sit this one out or bounce it anytime and then just pick up, next week's case. Because yeah, this one is quite graphic. So don't say that we didn't warn you. Again, with the complexity of this case and doing it as a collab, we're just going to go through the case as a whole. So you guys in the chat can feel free to talk amongst yourselves as we present the case, and then we'll certainly chit chat with you guys after about it. So let's see. Hey, Fiddle, good to see you. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. We are covering David Parker Ray, also known as the Toybox Killer. So let's go ahead and get started.
March 22nd, 1999, Cynthia Vigil was naked, afraid, and running for her life. She was able to find a home where she ran inside begging for help. Police were contacted. They had no idea what they were about to discover in David Parker Ray's House of Horrors.
David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939 in Belen, New Mexico. His father was a violent alcoholic and would end up abandoning the family. His mother eventually sent him and his sister to live with his grandparents. At times, David would still see his father, who would buy him violent porn magazines. However, these visits would usually end in his father physically abusing him. David's school life, well, it wasn't that much better. He was bullied by the other students, and he was shy around girls. As a teenager, he started to drink alcohol and use drugs. In 1957, David graduated high school and worked a number of odd jobs as a mechanic. As an adult, David served in the U.S. Army. He also married 4 times, each of them ending in divorce. He had 2 daughters, one of whom was Glenda Jean, also known as Jessie. David would eventually settle in Elephant Butte and worked as a maintenance man for the New Mexico Parks Department in Truth or Consequences. This is where he became involved in a small underground BDSM scene, attending secret parties and clubs.
Although it's not entirely sure when David started his criminal activity, It is guessed it was between the 1950s through the 1960s. Now, flash forward to 1997. David meets Cindy Hendy. She was a 37-year-old mother of three on the run from police who had ditched her children and fled across the country. Not long after David and Cindy started dating, she becomes involved in his criminal activities. David had a specific way of assaulting the women he would go on to and kidnap and torture. He would use pre-recorded audio tape that he would play for his victims after they woke up from being drugged. The tape was a heartless and detailed rundown of what they were about to experience. It was designed to instill maximum fear in his victims. He would also give the women drugs that would cause amnesia so that they would not remember any of the events that took place.
Wow. I just have to point out here, the audio of the tape that Beckham is referring to, it is online, so you guys can search it and easily find it. It's very graphic. I have listened to it myself. It's so heart-wrenching to listen to. Beckham, have you listened to it at all?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Just the tone alone, and
Yes.
he gets to the point, and I think that's what he designed it to do.
Mm-hmm.
Not wasting any time, setting the tone of what was about to happen, and to kind of pretty much put that in sync thought of, because as you know, I kind of said it earlier in the intro of how he liked to set up his, the mental game for his victims. So I think it was a precursor to, that he wanted to instill in his victims. So he set the tone pretty early.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was a mental mind fuck just as much as it was going to be a physical, torturous experience. Yeah, like you said, the tone for me listening to it, the voice, like if you separate it, his voice sounds just like a much older man. It doesn't sound as harsh as what the words that are coming out of his mouth. Like the two don't match, and I think that kind of adds to the intensity of the situation. But that's just my opinion.
Well, right, because the tone it levels the game, it levels the plane, the plane, and then the words really kind of stigmatize to your mind of what's about to happen. It makes you really think if you put yourself there in that moment.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, March 22nd, 1999. Remember Cynthia, who we mentioned at the beginning of the episode? Well, she escaped after 3 days of being held captive and tortured in what became known as the Toybox. Cynthia had waited for David to go to work, and then she took the keys from Cindy Hendy, David's girlfriend and accomplice. Cynthia and Cindy, they fought. Cindy struck Cynthia on the head with a lamp in an attempt to knock her out. However, Cynthia managed to unlock her chains, stab Cindy in the neck with an ice pick from the floor, and run away. All she had on was an iron slave collar and the padlock chains. Cynthia, she made it to a mobile home, and the owner let her in, gave her a robe, and called 911. Police officers were already on their way to David's house because a 911 call came in, but it was interrupted. They claimed that they'd abducted Cynthia in an attempt to help get rid of her heroin addiction, but police found a fake police badge that David had used to abduct Cynthia. Both David and Cindy were arrested and charged with 12 different criminal charges, including kidnapping and aggravated assault.
When the officers looked inside the toy box, they were not prepared for what they found. The $100,000 homemade torture chamber he called his toy box was filled with the following: whips, chains, pulleys, straps, clamps, leg spreader bars, and surgical blades and saws. There were also numerous sex toys, torture implements, syringes, and detailed diagrams showing different methods and techniques for inflicting pain. There was also a gynecology table gynecology table that the victims would be restrained in, a mirror mounted on the ceiling so that they would be able to see themselves being raped and tortured, and a device for electric torture. There was a homemade electricity generating device that was used in torture. David would play recorded audio tape of himself or his victims whenever they regained consciousness. David would also record the torture either by audio or with a video camera. One thing police found that they didn't expect was evidence of more victims.
A month before this, a woman known as Angelica M. went to police and told them that she had been abducted by David Parker Ray. The police, however, they didn't investigate it. Police found photos of another victim in the trailer and animal bones buried in the nearby ground. March 28, 2000, David's trial began. Jury selection had completed, but the trial would be postponed. David had suffered a heart attack. May 7th, 2000, Angelica M. died of a drug overdose.
Now a little bit further, May 23rd, 2000, David's new trial began. Cynthia Vigil and her mother and another surviving victim, Kelly Garrett, who's David's daughter Glenda met at a bar and drug, testified against him. Kelly stated that one night after she fought with her husband and went to play billiards with her friends, her beer was drugged and she was knocked unconscious. She was raped and tortured for 2 days to the point of numerous blackouts. She was then driven home by David, who told her husband he had found her walking aimlessly. The police at the time found her story too outlandish, and her husband, who assumed he cheated on him, filed for divorce. So Kelly moved away to Colorado. For years, she couldn't remember what happened, but she was haunted by vivid nightmares. She found out she was a victim because her former mother-in-law, on seeing the news, believed that Kelly may have been one of his victims, and she called in a tip to the FBI. Agents reviewing the tape noticed that one of the women in the tapes had a distinctive swan tattoo on her leg. Kelly did indeed have that matching tattoo.
Oh my God, that is wild. That is absolutely wild. Think of how her whole life turned upside down and she didn't even know why. And then all these years later.
That's kind of hard to think about, because you're going about your life, but yet you're having these you're maybe she was driving. You know how you're driving, through traffic and you're sitting on a light and your mind tends to wander and you're just having these thoughts, or these thoughts creep in your mind. Whether you're having a stressful day or whatnot, these thoughts would probably creep in her mind, and she would wonder what they were. That's really, really, crazy.
And then all those years find out later.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Well, David, he appeared unmoved while his victims cried and said he was having a hard time expressing himself. July 2000, the judge declared a mistrial because the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. Not all of them were persuaded that the testifying victims had been held against their will. November 2000, a retrial began. A few days into this trial, the judge passed away, so the proceedings couldn't resume until April. June 2001, David's second retrial began. He had made a plea bargain to plead guilty in exchange for his daughter Jessie, who had been an accomplice in at least one murder. So Jessie received a 2.5-year sentence with 5 years probation for her role. David admitted to having another accomplice, Billy Bowers, a previous business partner who David also murdered. David meticulously documented his murderous acts in diaries, noting details like the time and place of the kidnappings.
Mary Ellen O'Toole, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's agent and the FBI's foremost expert in the field of investigating criminal sexual sadism, testified at that examination of David Parker Ray's home. The trailer had been converted into his infamous toy box, and the sexual paraphernalia and drawings found there suggest that Ray was a criminal or is a criminal sexual sadist. David stated the 2.5 years in confinement since his arrest has allowed him to reflect, read his Bible, and get right with God. He said he put his life in God's hands and that he can't change the past, but only can be sorry. David was sentenced to 224 years in prison. And on May 28th, 2002, David Parker Ray died of a heart attack. He had only served 8 months of his prison sentence.
All right, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. All right, 224 years for his sentence. I can get behind that. And then he only served 8 months before he passed away. What an injustice. But also his now saying that he got right with God and that he can't change the past, but he's sorry. Who is he sorry for? Himself? I don't think he's sorry for the victims at all.
Well, going back to college, I'm thinking real quick to the philosophy classes I took, to the psychology classes I took. This could be a really distinct and interesting, you could have conversations about. Because we as humans go through a change of process all the time. We're in constant mode of change all the time. And we've talked about in other cases how when you go to, what prison is for reform and all of that, right? And that kind of thing. So, you could even add that to it. You can add the criminology classes I took about the prison side of it and all that, and reform and all that happens with that. You can also garner some of that and bring it into the discussion, because the discussions will be interesting. Because yes, as the point that you said, he did all that prior to a certain time, and then he gets to a certain current stage and he goes through a change. And you could definitely file an argument for that change. And then you're going to bring in the reform, the prison and all that kind of stuff. So it would definitely bring in for some interesting conversations, dialogue, and and just processing the whole case as a whole, because you're going to have different sides to the different stories and the different outlooks that people have, and also in different stages of life. You have the criminal life, the after criminal life, if they're gonna, they change, and all those types of things, and people that do believe in reform. And you're going to have the religious aspect of it too. You're going to have, you could bring all kinds of, pieces of different times and subject matter that could entice a very interesting dialogue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you just
we don't have time to go into all those things, but you did,
Yeah. No, you said it perfectly. There are going to be people who, I'm just paraphrasing, there are going to be people who agree, that agree in reform. And maybe he is making right and finding God and, going down that path. And then there's going to be a side that's like, yeah, that's a load of crap. Absolutely not. He's just saying that because that's what you're supposed to do, to try to show that you're sorry, but you really don't mean it. So there's going to be both sides, but.
Yeah, and then on the prison side, or in the state, remember, laws go state to state. You also got to remember that. Yes. This was in the state of New Mexico, right? Mm-hmm. And look at that. I was talking to Shelly earlier. Look at the town name that you brought up early on.
Truth or consequences.
Exactly. That name alone, and we can kind of go back to probably when the town started during the whole, out west times of outlaws and Jesse James and Billy the Kid and all that, right? It kind of sounds kind of like that, and do you really never know the truth, that kind of thing, right? And to every truth, there could be a consequence. So that even the mystique of the town's name adds to this case, because if he would have been found guilty of murder or I don't even think they ever found any, and we'll probably get to that here in a second, but different states have different consequences, right? So Texas, he could have probably faced a different type of consequence, and I'm just saying Texas because what happens to people.
Oh, Texas doesn't mess around.
That's my point, right? So different scenarios we can talk about, but he was tried there
Yeah.
in New Mexico.
So to continue, well, what about Cindy Hendy? Well, she stood trial and received a sentence of 36 years for her role in the crimes, specifically kidnapping and criminal sexual penetration. This sentence was part of a plea bargain as she agreed to testify against David. November 2002, the toy box was opened to the public with the hope that it would lead to more surviving victims coming forward. October 2011, the FBI performed a search of McRae Canyon near Elephant Butte Lake, looking for potential victims, but they didn't find any. 2019, after serving approximately 2/3 of her sentence, Cindy was granted parole and released from prison.
David Parker Ray claimed to have abducted about 40 victims. However, it is suspected he murdered as many as 60 women.
That is the case of David Parker Ray, also known as I knew I was going to butcher that, also known as the Toybox Killer. Wow. We just unpacked a lot, and thank you guys who stayed in the chat for this. I saw the numbers kind of dropping as we were going through this, but like I warned everybody, this is a very, very graphic case. So I knew it might be a bit much for people, but for those of you that, kind of stuck around, now that me and Beckham can pay attention to the chat and kind of talk a bit with you guys, what do you think? What do you guys have to say about this? Were you familiar with this case? Did you know it? I do have to say, I talked to Beckham just before we went live. He had referenced an FBI profiler, and I'm actually reading a book of hers, Mary Ellen O'Toole, a former FBI agent, and in it, she discusses her meeting with David Parker Ray and just how he was when she met him versus, what he was like, with his toy box and his crimes. I'll save that for when I do a book review, but it was very, very interesting to read a bit more in depth about her experience with him when she was interviewing him. It's just, it was just very interesting that David Parker Ray was somebody that flew under the radar for as long as
I was just going to say for a long time, for like nearly 30 decades, 30 years.
30 decades?
I'm sorry, 30 years. Sorry. Yeah, no, sorry. 30 years.
Yeah, that's just a little bit of difference. 30 decades, 30 years, just a little bit of difference.
I'm sorry, 30 years. 3 decades is what I meant. Almost 3 decades, it seems. Right? 70, no, 20. Because if you put about the late 70s, I mean, if you're kind of starting to think about middle to late 70s, which would be what? I'm just saying, make the math easy. 79 to 99, that's 20 years.
20.
So, about 20 something years. Yeah.
Yeah. This was one, he was one of the more heinous, killers, and just overall, I'm trying to think
he used his ability. He used his ability. He was real handy, as you can see. He had his job was he had a mechanic job, maybe did some electric work, maybe some electrician work. You know that he was really handy with putting things together, assembling things together, and it was became part of his, what he was into.
Yeah.
Because that's what I mean,
Yeah. As we talked about, Beckham, he was one that there was just so many levels of depravity where he didn't just commit, physical assaults. It was just, he played extreme mental games with his victims, and he used his own daughter. He used his girlfriend, and he used his own daughter to, get what he wanted, and what he wanted was more victims. It's just there was no stopping him.
Yeah, the thing about his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, it was almost like she was into the same kind of thing. Now, what did she think that? Because I remember, I think, I believe Shelley told me about one of her victims, how one of his victims, Shelley told me about, believed and forgave Cindy because she felt that Cindy was sort of one of his victims. Now, I could see that because if she was into the, that world of BDSM, the world, but I don't think she might have been aware of how far he was going to take it. Does that make sense? Like he might have pulled her in, intrigued her some. Then of course they're dating, and then he lets her in, and then it just becomes a whole thing, and that's possible because, what are the chances of you meeting another person like that at a, the chances of that happening, you see what I'm saying? So in essence, the victim believed that she and herself, his girlfriend that was also an accomplice, was also a sort of a victim of his in a sense. So she forgave her.
Wow. That's incredible.
Right. So I mean, like I said, this case, although it's disturbing and with all of the physicalities and things like that, we're unsure of how many potential victims he really had. Although I think Shelly dropped a note in the chat that the FBI has a lot of images and a lot of jewelry and items of the victims.
410 images.
Right. So that kind of, I think they're estimating based on that, the physical evidence that they have pieces of things of potential victims. And I believe that Parker Ray was gonna, before he passed away, he might have he was gonna release information about where he had buried some of the victims or disposed of them, however you want to put it. Because I think he's also linked to a couple other murders away from that. He's also, I mean, just away, but they could never remember. In order to really put together a case, especially a murder case, you have to have a body, number one, and number two, you have to have the murder weapon, the murder weapon.
Well, you don't always have to have a body. It just makes it that much harder to get a conviction.
So they gave up pretty much. That's what happened. They didn't have any evidence, then they couldn't really tie him to a murder because he was not convicted of any murder charges. So
so there was a question: wasn't he a highly paid government employee? So he worked as a maintenance man for the New Mexico Parks Department. So he worked for the I guess state. I don't know if that makes him a state.
I think it was a state or the county, the state of the county, the city.
Yeah,
it was local government. How are you going to put it?
Yeah,
I mean, like he had a good job. He had a good job.
Not Kelly, sorry, Shelly. It's believed that he killed his boss when he was a mechanic early on because he was always at odds with him, and they found him. Danny, I studied and prepared for your show for you guys. Thank you, Shelly. Let's see. Doug says this is also reminiscent of the depravity of repeat offender Lawrence Singleton, like Kenneth McDuff, and his heroic victim Mary Vincent. Yes. Oh my God, I haven't thought about that case in a long time.
But yeah, man, this case really can go different dives and different subject matters.
Let's.
I mean, how do you feel about prior to his death? He said that he found God, he forgave, he's asked for forgiveness, and he was ready to move on, and that he was going to give law enforcement that information about the bodies.
I think it was a load of crap.
Do you? I mean, do you?
Honestly, I think there was so many. This was not just one person that he kidnapped and kidnapped and harmed. Not two, not three, we can go on and on counting the numbers.
20-something years worth. Yeah, 20-something years worth.
20-something years worth. All these victims. We may never even know, like you said, the exact number of victims that were assaulted and or murdered. So for him to then be caught behind bars, he didn't turn himself in. He was caught. And then once he's in jail, now he finds God. Now he's sorry. And then he ends up dying.
And we don't know the number of victims that probably he let go and they just kind of moved on with their lives and then don't ever want to talk about it again.
Yeah.
There's
Okay,
also
Renee
those
makes an
victims too.
excellent point. Bundy pulled the same stuff too. I'll tell you, I'll tell you where the bodies are. I know with Bundy, he was on death row and he was set to be executed. You know, David Parker Ray wasn't given the death penalty, but you know, him cooperating
Well, he
with,
was only there
I'm sure he was going to be getting something out of it. He wasn't just going to cooperate out of the kindness of his heart because he's now really sorry for what he did.
No, but no, I'm talking about the transition because there's no way he could have been reformed in what 6 months. He was only there how many months? Not what did you say it was?
He served 8 months.
8 months. Yeah, I mean, come on, right?
Yeah, no.
No, right.
Even if he was there 10 years, I would still think it was a load of crap, honestly.
So you're saying that some people cannot get pulled in the right direction, honestly, and to
I
have
don't,
true reform.
true. Yes.
That's what you feel.
That's what I believe. I think there are
I mean,
some
no, and I'm not saying
may.
there's anything wrong with that belief. You could be right with certain criminals, with that they're so embedded in their crimes. You know what I mean? They're so embedded in their crimes that there's no way of pulling them back. It's just out of the question. Whether
Yeah.
it's a scientific meaning it's a mental thing, with a psychology aspect to it, or just something that really is just embedded in them deep within with their soul.
Yeah, it looks like the chat's pretty in agreement. Agree 100% with that kind of criminal. It's funny how these jerks suddenly find God.
Right.
David Parker Ray was full of poop. No chance he was reformed or on the road to reforming. You know, Cindy Hendy has to be on some sort of FBI list no matter where she is.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. I would be. You know what? I'm actually not.
Well, you see, that's making me think about her. Was she really like him, or did she maybe get in him? You know, they had similar interests in their sexual preferences, but then it got deep, and it got really deep. And then
I think there's some theories. I think we may
know?
never know, but here's a thought. Well, first, I just want to say with Shelly, you know how on Facebook there's, you know, for Karla Homolka, from the Ken and Barbie birders, there's like these Facebook pages following Karla Homolka so people at all times know where she is. I'm surprised something like that isn't up for Cindy Hendy, or maybe it is and I just don't know about it. But to go back to your question, Beckham, so people could agree or disagree. I think she was aware of what he was doing and whether how much she was involved and how much she enjoyed or didn't enjoy being involved, who can say? But with that being said, he was doing. So she was therefore an accomplice. And I wouldn't be surprised if he held that over her head. So maybe she couldn't stop it. Maybe she couldn't turn it in because in a sense, he had it over her. Well, you know what I'm doing. You're just as guilty because you've allowed this to go on. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So he could have held that over her, making her maybe, like you mentioned earlier, a possible quote unquote victim in this. Who knows? But that certainly could be one theory to look at. What do you think?
And to Shelley's point about New Mexico being very desolate.
I was waiting for you to pronounce that.
No, I was just thinking my thought. What I was gonna say is I think I've told this story on one of our other shows or something. And I'm pretty sure people in the chat have been to places like this. I remember going, one of my buddies had a bachelor party and he was from East Texas and he likes hunting and that kind of thing. He's not the Vegas type or whatever, right? So he wanted a group of guys to go out hunting and fishing in a lake and everything like that, and deep in the woods in East Texas. And in the middle of nowhere, this was really weird. There was like this little setup, like a little mini town, just deep in the woods, and there was a bar. Somehow there, I don't know how to say it. I explain it because it's just unthinkable. It's not an official city limit or anything like that, but there was a bar. We went to it, and it was just a weird vibe. And there's places like that where there's no laws. But and they're their own. They have their own laws, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And it was just a very weird vibe. And we left. I don't even think we finished we ordered one beer each and we just took off. We didn't even finish our beers. We just took off because it was such a weird vibe. and you know, we left, and that was deep in East Texas woods back there, and I'm pretty sure there's places like that all over the United States to where you don't know what's happening in these locations because law enforcement don't get out there unless there's something, and the sheriff it knows about a certain area, or where they have that law enforcement extension. You know what I mean? Do you see what I'm saying? So yeah, and like people are naming places right now. So it's almost like he was able to get away with it because if you go deep and research this case, you could see where his home was. It was kind of isolated, and he had the surroundings for him to be able to commit these crimes. So he was able to get away with it for so long because the types of girls he was getting, that type of thing. So,
So I just want to piggyback off of one thing that you just said as to how he got away with it for as long as he did, because we hear this now and we're like, oh my God, and you know what? There were chances that law enforcement got involved and they completely dropped the ball. That goes without saying. So shame on law enforcement. However.
Oh yeah. They didn't believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So I referenced the book that I'm currently reading by Mary Ellen O'Toole. So one of the things that she mentioned when she interviewed him and interviewed people in his community, his neighbors, coworkers, everybody had nothing but nice things to say about him. And even when she met him, he was very charming, very polite, very soft-spoken, very sweet. His neighbors had nothing but nice things to say.
Right. Yeah.
They were all shocked.
Facade. He just had this facade. Yeah.
Shocked. Yep. And it just goes to show, people want monsters to look like monsters and they don't. We see the end product where we know what they did. So we look at their picture and we're like, oh my God. But the people who knew these, quote unquote, knew, him and, these other offenders day in, day out, you really don't know. And he was able to slide under the radar because he wasn't what the police were looking for. He was the polite guy in town. Everybody had nothing but great things to say. So Renee says always the quiet ones. Thank you, Tony. Shelly says he literally looks like someone I would have trusted, like someone who was familiar to me from my childhood. And even if you listen to the tape of his voice when he's going over what's about to happen to these victims in the toy box, again, if you separate the actual words he's saying versus the tone of his voice, he has a very sweet older gentleman's, like grandpa type of sounding voice is kind of how I would describe it. It doesn't match the depravity of what he says in those tapes. It just doesn't match. So I could, based on the research that we did, see how he could have, flied under the radar as long as he did, because he wasn't the type of monster people would be looking for.
Right. Yeah, it was like the perfect setup. People thought he was a nice guy. The area he lived in, or in and around the area, and how he could hide his trailer,
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned.
I didn't name it, but I would call it, his trailer. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the layout of his land because, I know, me and you are from busy cities, but a lot of people on our chat are from a variety of, different places. So, for example, where I am, busy city life, if my neighbor had a trailer in their backyard, I would know.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But where David Parker Ray lived, it was so, as you almost mispronounced, desolate, that he was able to get away with it because the land was just so different and there was so much space that he was able to do that and it wasn't drawing attention.
Yeah, and I think he was a fisherman, wasn't he?
Fisherman.
I know he described how to get rid of a body, and he goes into detail. So he also knew how to.
Well, he did serve time in the U.S. Army.
Yeah, so I'm just
Yeah,
saying
don't see offhand
he
that
knew a little
specifically.
bit. I mean, he described it, so he knew what to do. Is what I'm, my point.
Yeah, no, when you're in the Army, that's no joke. You are trained to do certain things and you are skilled at certain things. And he took those skills and went in a very, very sick and twisted direction. Let's see. James says grandpa voice, so he sounds like Bill. Let's not knock Bill down. He's not here. Wait, does Paul own a wood chipper fiddle? You know what? We're not going to out Paulcast on, if he does murder on the side. That's for another day. Shelly and Danny could have a cool True Crime Weekly TV show. I bet big audience. Oh, man. Tony, I love how Beckham's up here and you're like, Danny and Shelly.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, that's right. It was a fisherman who found the fish that had that had the human remains. That's it. Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm saying. The FBI has all this side evidence, and I think that's where they got the number from. The evidence, some pieces of clothing here, a bracelet there, an earring here, a ring.
Well, there was also, he would tape some of his victims. There was pictures, there was jewelry, there was, like you said, clothing, there was all these things. So they just had to make their best guess. But, he kept journals, he documented what he did.
Because he could go back. He'd have to take breaks. I think he was averaging anywhere from 3 to 5 a year. That's
depending
the
on what statistic you're looking at. Yeah.
So if he had a hunger for it, that's where he would revert back to.
It's, oh man. Let's see. Oh God, look at the better Paul. That dude just roasted Beckham. Tony Stewart causing trouble. Oh man.
Oh, we know which side of the pond Tony hangs out at.
Hey now, Tony Stewart's a good friend of the show.
Oh, I'm just saying. I mean, we know what he likes. That's all I'm saying.
he just said here.
Tony,
he wants an all-female cast.
I'm gonna get you like the DVD set of Charlie's Angels. So you have all women, being the heroes and solving the crimes.
Don't give away your Charlie's Angels DVD set, Beckham. Come on. So if anybody else has any other quick questions or comments on this case, we'd love to hear them. And for those of you who aren't catching this live, certainly leave a comment, on the video as it stays up. Because, this has been one of those cases that we've been, planning to do a collab for a while. And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about with this case.
Yeah, you can have part 2, part 3. There's so many things you could talk about this case. We kind of hit it quick. I mean, what we went over was pretty much the quick hits. You could deep dive this case. There's a lot that goes into this case. Psychology, the physicality.
You could do a whole episode on Cindy Hendy.
You could do this her, and you can even have talk about the victims a little bit more. And some of them, some of the victims have survived and they've gone on to do better things for the world. They started I believe they started programs and things like that to help others and things like that. So you could definitely.
I did read that.
There's a lot where you could definitely go, also deep dive into certain subjects within this case.
Yeah. Capone says the Parker case saga. No, I think that would be, oh man, researching this would be even deeper, would be too sick and twisted even for me. Sorry, don't mind the noise on my street. Let's see.
Shelly did her own research for this case.
Thank you, Shelly. And here I'm like, oh man, Beckham, joining me for this. Shelly did the work. Thank you, Shelly. All right. Had to be signs. Yeah. I would like to think so. But, based on what, the FBI agent who interviewed him said there,
let me leave you with this. Speaking of signs, there was women that got away that he'd let go.
They were so drugged. Like
I know, yeah, but like if you had a thought, I'm just saying, if you had a thought or something, like I'm just going to what Renee posted.
Mhm.
You know, I think probably what most likely happened is two things. They couldn't remember the exact
Yeah.
details, or they just put it away and moved on with their lives, became survivors. So, you know.
I mean, in the end, I don't think we'll know. I mean, we do know for sure that based on the drugs he was using, some of the victims they just didn't remember. We do know that. Whether, like you said, maybe some did, and they just chose to put it aside and just move on with
Right.
their life, because that
Yeah.
happens in
For
other true
20
crime cases
something
too of
years.
assaults. They
Right.
just want to move forward.
For 20 something years he got away with it.
Yeah.
And if it hadn't been for that one moment where him and his girlfriend got they got sloppy, got lazy, and that's what did him in. And who
Yeah.
knows what would have happened going further when we don't know.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Let's see. Tony Stewart says, "Much respect, Beckham."
Oh, I know.
He sure did,
I'm just
Tony.
saying, he does like women.
You know what? T- what do you think, Beckham? Comment of the night? You think Beckham found a good woman?
Yeah, that's comment of the night. Yay.
We'll give that a
Goes to
star.
Tony.
Let's see. Renee says that's why a lot of these killers go for hookers. Yeah, victims that society isn't going to miss, and that's such a sad statement, but we've seen it time and time and time again, spanning several decades. Yeah. Let's see. Shelley says, because back then victims were still looked at like they caused it in some way, asked for it. That's the way it was addressed in court. And the younger victim, the more intimidated. Well said.
Yeah. Yeah. Weren't the victims early 20s? Like,
They were younger.
and also the drinking age was what? It's even if it was the early 80s, the drinking age might have been 18. And he could have, there could have been some 18-year-old, my point is that they were young, they were in their late teens, early 20s. So you're right. Good point.
Yeah. All righty, everybody. So we're going to wrap this one up. So again, this has been the case of David Parker Ray, the Toybox Killer. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Beckham, for joining me for this collab.
Thank you for having me. I hope everybody enjoyed it and everybody have a good week.
Yeah. So we will see you next time. But remember, in the meantime, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.